This is going to be a power half hour. We have about 30 minutes with our main speaker here. And I'm going to just get right to the point here. How many students, first of all, high school students do we have in the room? Oh, more than I thought. How many college students do we have? Hey. We had a lot of youth protesting today too, and I'll tell you, that's what made the difference and gave us an edge and the energy to get all the way from 42nd Street to Washington Square in about an hour. But seriously, in our discussion, I'm going to give the edge to any of the people that just raised their hands. And I want to take questions and comments, but mainly questions for the people sitting up here at the table, principally Chris Hedges, on what he said about the prospects of a U.S. attack on Iran. Secondarily, questions that people have or thinking that's been provoked over the question of what we can do to prevent this war as people living in this country. That's it. Take questions from anyone but preference to students. The woman in the front row in the orange sweater.
The question is, how do we respond to journalists and the argument coming from the pages of the New Yorker, George Packer, who says, we can't leave Iraq because of genocide. Historically, we've heard arguments such as this before, which was, they'll be able to let it out. If we leave, they'll kill themselves.
Well, the presupposition.
Why don't you just come up
All right,
here, Chris? We know this is mic'd.
The presupposition of that question is that American occupation forces are a force for stability in Iraq, and they're not. Is Ruth here? There should be some copies of the Nation story we did this July, where we spent 7 months, Layla El-Arian and I, interviewing 50 combat veterans from Iraq. Here, let me just show it so people know what it looks like. Hopefully, there are some copies back there. It's 15,000 words. It's 7 months of work. We interviewed 50 combat veterans, all on the record. We taped every single interview, and then we typed the transcripts out because we wanted this to be bulletproof. And these veterans had the courage, the moral courage, to talk about the atrocities that they had witnessed and in some cases participated in, and how these atrocities were a daily occurrence in Iraq. So when people like Packard or others talk about how there will be civil war if we withdraw or a genocide, and I don't want to pretend that kind of competition between competing ethnic groups in Iraq will not take place. It will. I think it mischaracterizes our own role. Iraq is a country beset by violence and terror from militias, ethnic groups, warlords, kidnappers, criminals, a few foreign fighters, and the occupation forces. And the occupation forces are a major source of terror for the average Iraqi. And that was certainly what these veterans laid out in very graphic and disturbing detail. So the notion that we are a force of stability or calm or good, it just doesn't play out in the reality of Iraq. Unfortunately, that's not presented in this sort of mythic narrative of us as saviors that is adopted by most of the media when they cover the war. I mean, you know, the very people, of course, who sold us the war no longer cover the war. They're busy with O.J. Simpson or Paris Hilton or Anna Nicole Smith. I mean, we know in terms of times, in terms of minutes of coverage devoted to the war, there's been a precipitous decline because as the war has just gone sour, their response is to pretend the war doesn't exist. This is, you can get it online, it's July 30th, August 6th issue.
There are free copies provided by the Nation at the back of the room, and I hope there's enough for everyone. It's really worth holding on to. I'm going to call on the young woman in the black shirt on this side. You, blonde, yes, you.
Because America is in Iraq. So what is your thought on, I mean, that's the situation. What is your thought on what should happen next? Should they leave as soon as possible? Should they, if not, stay? And if not leave? Or, yeah, what then? Basically, I want to know anything about, like, immediate action.
The question is, what should the U.S. do now that it's in Iraq?
Iraq has ceased to exist as a unified country. The experiment that was Iraq in the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire no longer functions, and it will never function again. It's over. We broke it. And I think most of us who spent a lot of time in Iraq and struggled vainly to talk about the consequences of an occupation feared precisely this. I covered the war in Yugoslavia. I was there for 3 years. I know what the dissolution of a state looks like. The problem is that, of course, we've lost the war. We can, the Bush administration is sort of hanging on by its fingertips to pass the war on to the next recipient of the presidency, but it's over. And when we withdraw, there will be, I suspect, a massive bloodletting on the part of armed factions, Shiite, Sunni, and Kurd. But I also expect that the neighboring states, Syria, Iran, and Turkey, will not sit idly by. Iraq, unlike Yugoslavia, is a country rich in natural resources, not only oil but water. The Turks, the Syrians, and the Iranians have no intention of allowing the Kurds to establish an independent state. The only possibility of a viable Kurdish state is seizing Kirkuk because it's an oil center. I think that the only way at this point the Kurds can be stopped from seizing Kirkuk would be Turkish intervention. I think the Turks would intervene. And what I suspect, I beg your pardon? What? Yeah, right. Well, no, I covered Anfal. I mean, I'm well aware of what the Turks did to the Kurds and the Armenians and the Kurds southeastern Turkey. The problem is that I think you would have a scramble to pick off the carcasses of Iraq, and that scramble would involve neighboring states, so that the withdrawal of American forces, which ultimately are not going to be able to prevent that, that whole invasion has opened up a kind of Pandora's box and unleashed a kind of regional disintegration, which is terrifying. It's already, we already see it with the policy of the occupation forces, that what they will do is arm the Sunni militias. And I have no doubt that the Saudis are, if not deeply involved in arming the militias, will become deeply involved should we withdraw. And so you will have Iranian-backed Shia forces, you will have Saudi, American backed Sunni militias, and I think the Kurds has been true ever since the Treaty of Lausanne in 1922, when the Kurds were sold out, will just get crushed in the pincers of everybody slicing up the country. But I think it's important to accept the fact that Iraq as a viable entity is finished because we killed it.
I'm going to call on the young man about 6 rows back there with your hand up and the baseball cap. Yes.
I'm curious what you think about the use of private military contractors in Iraq. And do you think that if our government were to pull out troops, that they would kind of hide behind private military contractors to maintain some sort of American interest in the region?
The building of a mercenary army in Iraq, 126,000 strong, 20 to 30,000 of whom are fighting units or combat, actively engaged in combat, is one of the most disturbing consequences of this war. These mercenary forces have become empowered not solely to fill the gap that's in Iraq that can't be filled under a volunteer army. I mean, certainly, you know, there's probably about 2 million Americans in this country who actually pay the price and cost of this war, and I'm talking about personally. The rest of the country is immune from paying that price. Well, I mean, eventually, of course, we're borrowing up to the hilt. I think the last estimates I heard were this war is going to cost, which costs what, $490 million a day, is going to cost upwards of $6 trillion. We're going to have to pay for it eventually. But I think part of the political passivity and complacency is that such a tiny percentage of the country is actually paying the cost. And that has been made possible by the empowerment of these mercenary forces, groups like Blackwater. But the creation of, in essence, what has become a Praetorian Guard, and by Praetorian Guard I'm referring to that private army that was first raised by the Emperor Augustus. For the first time they brought 9 divisions down below the Rubicon, and over time, of course, they ended up dictating the politics of Rome, has as grave a consequence for our own democracy as it does for Iraq. What you've seen with Blackwater is an empowerment through government funding of a group headed by Eric Prince, a charter member of the Christian Right, a former Navy SEAL, a billionaire in his own right, who has set up huge, several thousand acre training centers. They have one in Illinois, one in South Carolina, I believe. They're trying to build one outside of San Diego now. Their own fleets of helicopters. They have gotten into the weapon trade, and they've set up a series of foreign bases around the country, including one near the border with Iran. What happens when there's a crisis on American soil? We saw a glimpse of it after Hurricane Katrina. The government contracted out with Blackwater, and these guys showed up in the streets of New Orleans in big SUVs without license plates, in their trademark black uniforms with automatic weapons. And should a dirty bomb go off in an American city, should there be another series of environmental disasters, we've now created a mercenary force that can be deployed on American soil with no constitutional oversight, and it is beholden to the most rapacious and dangerous political elements within American society. The building of a mercenary army has had, of course, devastating consequences for Iraqis. These people, because they operate with impunity, they kill, and a lot of the veterans we interviewed talked about this. They just kill randomly on the streets of Baghdad. without any kind of check at all. All of these people are being filtered or integrated back into American society. And they're outside any kind of formal legal structure. There is no control. And they're exceedingly dangerous.
And of course, the crisis this past week was the killing with impunity, and Maliki starting to stand up to the U.S. and say, that's not okay. And it remains to be seen how much this will affect Maliki's long-term service as a loyal U.S. functionary, in my opinion.
Amber might know more than I. I only know because I checked with a lawyer for myself. You want to file your income tax. It's a crime not to file it. You want to file the paper. Contractors League does this all the time. There are actually many different options. Some people don't pay the surcharge on their telephone bill, but I just want to make it, my goal in not paying is to create the biggest headache for them possible. And so what I was told to do was to file the taxes and take the money that I would pay and put it in an escrow account and then go to court and dispute it so that it becomes in dispute. So you actually clog up the courts. And they can't come and like seize all your property because you've paid the money and put it in an escrow and turned it in essence over to a judge. But there are many ways, and the War Resisters League has other options. Some people don't file, some people file and don't pay, but that's what's that? Well, the billionaires, yeah, well, unfortunately I'm not in that rank. So, but that's what I'm going to do.
I would just...
I think that's a really important point, and I'm sure the other panelists want to address it, but I'm going to make the unpopular defense of Ralph Nader. I don't believe that Ralph Nader lost us the elections in 2004. They would have stolen that election with or without Ralph Nader. And I think it's just terribly unfair. When you go back and look at what Ralph did in 2000, is he created a grassroots movement that scared the shit out of the Democratic Party. And, Ralph wanted to hold a political rally in Madison Square Garden. He didn't have any money. So what did he do? He charged everybody at the door $5 to pay for it, and he filled the place. And if you don't think the Democrats from that moment on went to bring him down, you're extremely naive. The only effect that we're going to begin to have on a complacent and completely bought off Democratic Party is to walk away from the two-party system. The only candidate who speaks with any integrity is Dennis Kucinich. But not only in terms of the war in Iraq, he's the only one who stood up and spoken against going to war with Iran, but the more important issue of the rise of the corporate state. What has happened since the Reagan administration, and Bill Clinton, or the Clintons, aided and abetted this through NAFTA, through the ending of welfare in our time. The Clintons understood that the corporate interests in this country would be quite happy to fund the Democratic Party if they walked away from labor and the unions, which the Clintons publicly announced at the time was a spent force. And that's what they did. And they figured that Clinton's argument was that the workers have to vote for us anyway. They're not going to go to the Republican Party. And so what we've seen is a disempowerment of the citizenry, because the only institution, however dysfunctional and inept it may be, that has the clout and power to work on behalf of citizens is the government. And our government no longer works on behalf of the citizens. It works for the corporations. So we can drive out Bush. I mean, you know, Bush is, you know, what is Bush? It's the first election in history where we elected a corporation. Until we break the back of the corporate state, we are just going to be whittled away to nothing. You know, the tragedy is that the media itself is so corporatized. There are 6 corporations, I have the figure slightly wrong, about 6 or 8, that control 80% of the media in this country. Television no longer does news. Its news is judged solely on its entertainment value. And, you know, I mean, Neil Post's right. We're a society amusing ourselves to death.
I guess I would think the problem goes back earlier than the disempowering of the citizenry under Clinton. I would say part of what we're seeing in effect right now is the fact that this country, since its inception, founded on slavery and genocide of Americans, a constitution that was a charter first for slavery with black people being 3/5 human, and then a charter for wage slavery and exploitation since then, has actually been the rubric, the framework under which this country's entire history has been operated, and which is why we have staged over 150 foreign interventions, Seattle wars, unjust invasions, and this is consistent with what's happening now in an even more rapacious and extreme form. And at every point you have it in the U.S. democracy between who's going to rule over an empire. It's sort of like if you lived in a prison and you could vote over who's going to be the warden. You might have some choice, but you're still in a prison. Well, this is still an empire, and that's what we're seeing. Every year there's always somebody, whether it's a Kucinich or a Dean or a whoever you have who's on the left end, or a Sharpton one year, who kind of gets people excited and says some of the things people want to hear. But by the time you get to through the primaries, and then the time you get to the actual elections, you have the kind of standoff that you had last 2004. You had Bush, commander-in-chief, wartime president, and Kerry reporting for duty. Okay, and the same thing, you've already got a promise in advance that the only viable Democratic contenders are Edwards, Clinton, and Obama. All of them have refused to say withdraw the troops from Iraq immediately. All of them have refused to take nuclear weapons off the table in dealing with Iran, because all of them, like the Republicans, are operating from the interests of empire, which are fundamentally different interests than the people of this country and the people of the world. I'll just say quickly, I think actually the way that it happened with Nixon, the way the impeachment went down, is not that they lobbied the Democrats or even the Republicans. There was massive upheaval in the streets, a whole generation in revolt, a whole culture of resistance. There were black people you know, there was a black liberation struggle, there was a women's liberation struggle, there was an anti-war struggle that was militant people burning their draft cards, saying, we don't give a fuck what the people in power are doing. We're not going for the politics of the possible, the best of all of them that are up there. We are setting terms from the bottom up and letting them respond to us. And this is the only way change has come in favor of the people in the history of this country, because we do live in an empire. Ultimately, I think we need a revolution to get to a whole different system. But right now, everybody, whether you want a revolution to get beyond this, which I do, and I invite people to come talk to me about that, or whether you just want to end the torture and the wars for empire and all of what we've been talking about tonight, we actually have to stop looking up. Stop looking up. Who are we going to give our power to? Who are we going to pressure? Who are we going to pick on? We have to start looking around. There are tens of millions of people in this country who are fed up, who are angry, who are agonizing, losing sleep at night. And we have to go out and get them and say, until we move, until we get in the streets, until we shut down the campuses with student strikes, until we get out there and dare to take history into our own hands in massive numbers, the people on the top will keep doing the shit they've done. We've seen this movie over and over again. And I'll end with this one quote, which I think is very powerful, from Baba